Bombs away.
Boom. Hey everyone, Chris here, the RC Geek, coming to you from the shop, and it is time to paint the Legend Hobby A1 Skyraider. I absolutely love this model. It flies amazing, and so be sure to check out my assembly review and then also my first flights video to get a sneak peek at the flight. And in this video, we're going to do a whole repaint on the airplane. We're going to paint it, panel lines, weathering, really kind of doll it up and give it the full treatment. The model is covered with iron-on covering. However, at the factory, they spray a full, flat, clear over the entire airframe. So as a result, that allows us to directly paint right over the stock finish. The paint adheres extremely well. And so that makes it super easy to do what we're going to do. In terms of the colors, I've got a plastic kit here for reference, but we're going to do Southeast Asia camouflage. Now for paint, I'm using Tamiya AS spray paints, and I've got a soft edge masking tape that I'm going to use to get the feathered edges with the spray paints. But for the colors, for the underside, it's the AS16, which is camouflage gray. And then for the tan, AS15, and then for the light green, AS14 olive green, and then for the dark green, AS6 olive drab. And I've actually checked those colors to the federal standard color chips, and they are extremely close in accuracy. I can't wait to get paint on this thing, but first things first, we gotta, of course, break it all down, take it all apart, and pull the stock markings off. Those are just peel and sticks, so they peel off fairly easily. And so let's get on to it. We'll start with painting, then we'll add markings, get some panel lines down, and finish it up with weathering. So let's go. Alright guys, so we've got the airplane painted, we've got the markings on, and so I wanted to talk through that a little bit before we go on to the next phase, which will be panel lines and weathering. So to paint the airplane, I used all spray cans on this, okay? So that makes it super easy to do. And with it being the Southeast Asia camouflage covering, you know, all of those separation lines between the different colors are already outlined for you, so it ended up being really simple. To paint the airframe, I started with the light colors first, so I started with the gray underside and then the brown on the upper surface first. And then from there, I used 3M soft edge masking tape, and that's a foam tape about a ½ an inch diameter or so. It's got sticky on one side, and so I just laid that out onto the airframe as needed to get the paint separation as I wanted them. So then you also have to, of course, mask off for the areas you don't want overspray, and I just used paper towels and frog tape to do that, and then sprayed the desired color. And so there was, you know, the brown, we started with that first, and then I sprayed the light green, and then I sprayed the dark green over that. I started with the wing first, and then I went onto the fuselage. So the one thing about the soft edge masking tape is it does tend to kind of stretch and roll, and so you do have to press it down pretty well. But if you find that that soft edge isn't giving what you want with the spray can, what I ended up doing is I came in after the fact and sprayed the colors into a paper cup, added a little lacquer thinner to it, and then sprayed over all of the separation lines with the airbrush to get a nice feathered edge. Because, you know, the camouflage, they're not hard edges, it's all freehand feathered edges all over the full scale airplane. And so I did that for all of the colors as necessary. That was done in the same manner, going from light to dark colors, because with the feathered edges, the darker colors tend to take a little bit better over the lighter colors than vice versa with that fade that you get from the airbrush. And so the airbrush I use is a Grex airbrush. I really like those airbrushes a lot, and they're really fantastic. So then that finished the painting of the airframe. Love how the colors came out. You know, the Tamiya spray cans are absolutely fantastic spray paints. And they're really accurate to the full scale colors. And so from there, once I had it all painted, it was on to the markings. Now, I went with the socket to them paint scheme. It was something that I had a plastic kit for, and I really kind of liked the look of it. And so the markings came from a fellow Skyraider driver. They're printed and cut vinyl, and just like you would get from Cali Graphics. One other thing I wanted to mention is I've started playing with some of the ordnance. I've drawn and printed a 750-pound M117 bomb, and I plan to make those droppable. And then also I did some work on the centerline tank, and I actually moved the mount back so that it would shift the tank forward into a more scale location. And so to do that, I just physically moved the E-flite capture mechanism aft on the tank itself, and then just used a lightweight Bondo to fill in and recontour what was missing there. So, and then painted it all up. It was really easy to do, and it looks so much more scale in that position. I've got a whole bunch more weapons to print out, and so we'll be doing that while we're working on the rest of the airplane. And so, yeah, time to get on to some panel lines and some weathering. We're going to do pencil panel lines all over the airframe. I'm not going to go too crazy with that, and then we're going to really weather it up, because these Skyraiders in Vietnam were extremely dirty. They carried 40 gallons of oil, and I think it leaked out onto the airframe mostly. So there's going to be a lot of fun had in making the airplane representative of the warfighter that it was in Vietnam. All right, so let's get on to that. Alright guys, so here is the finished Skyraider. I love it. I wasn't sure about the paint scheme initially after I had painted it, because it's like, I kind of like the shark mouth, but now that it's all done, weathered, I love it. And actually, an amazing thing, so in the process of posting pictures of the airplane on my Facebook page, the pilot of this very airplane got in contact with me, and he sent me one of his books, Cheating Death, which features this airplane in it that he flew. It's missions that he flew over Vietnam absolutely amazing. It's such a cool thing. But in terms of finishing the airplane off, to do the panel lines, I simply just laid them down with a mechanical pencil. Half a millimeter lead diameter is what I like to default to, and actually you want kind of a harder lead versus a really soft lead as you do this, because if you're using a really soft lead, as you handle it, those lines are going to smudge and smear, and you don't want that. So look for a little bit harder lead, not super hard because then it'll have difficulty leaving a line, and so I used a series of straight edges and tape to lay out the lines as I needed to on the airplane, and I used just, I have a Tamiya plastic kit, and I just used that diagram in there to lay out the panel lines too. They're not exactly the same, but certainly close enough for what we're doing here. So one of the things I want to mention though, in terms of taping, I used frog tape, and I actually cut small strips of that tape so that I could get the lines around the complex curves where I needed to, and you want to make sure that that's laid down really well, and so then you just use that as your edge with the pencil as you draw it on. And then I also have nice long straight edges for like on the fuselages, things of that sort. So, you know, you get resourceful and as you need to lay out the panel lines. But then once I had them all laid out on the airframe, I sprayed a light clear coat over the whole thing. And what that does is it protects the panel lines and keeps them from getting smudged and ultimately disappearing in the weathering process. Now I used the Rust-Oleum 2x matte clear. I've been using that a lot more lately. It's a non-yellowing clear. It sprays real nice, gives a nice sheen that I'm looking for. And so I've been leveraging that a lot. It's so simple because it comes in a spray can. So once I had laid the clear coat down, it was on to the weathering process. Now, weathering is a multi-stage process, and you know, what are we doing? We're artificially aging an airplane. We'll never be able to replicate those years being just beaten down in the sun and in the elements, so we're trying to simulate, not replicate, that aging that occurs. And so what I'd like to do first is I will start with the oil stains and streaks and that sort of stuff, and I will apply those all around the airframe, focusing mostly on the underside, because as you look at a full-scale airplane, especially a military airplane like this, the oil will tend to drip and then leak out the bottom, and so the bottom side is always dirtier than everywhere else around the airframe. So I like to use acrylic pigments to do that. You can also use oil paints. I know guys have used that as well. I used Folk Art Raw Umber and Folk Art Black, and I used combinations thereof to get the look that I was looking for. And so I used mostly the Raw Umber. That's a nice brown color, and I used that all around the airframe. I would apply the pigment in the desired location with a paintbrush. Alright, so I would just dab it down however I would want to, and if I wanted to streak back, I would apply some right there at the base, horizontally along a panel line, and then apply some back in the direction of the airflow, and then using a paper towel, just wipe it off. Sometimes I would use my finger, but generally with a paper towel with light pressure, streak it back, wipe it off in the direction of the airflow, and what that does is it leaves kind of a streak. And if I wasn't happy with the look of it, just get some Tamiya acrylic thinner, put it into a paper towel, wipe it all off, and try again. And so I did that all around the airframe. And so on the wings, you know, just some select areas on the upper surface. On the wing, I focused heavily on the center section underneath. But one thing to note on the fuselage, in those cases, I was mostly applying the streaks vertically, because the collection that you see on the fuselage, on the upper fuselage especially, is a result of the elements and sitting outside. And so if you streak those stains downward, it gives it a much more authentic look from, you know, it'll simulate the airplane sitting out in the elements and getting rained on and various other things. And so with respect to the underside itself, I probably didn't go heavy enough on it. But I got to a point where I was like, you know what, I'd rather have not enough than way too much. but I don't know if I could actually go way too much on one of these. But and so from there, once I was happy with all of that, I did the similar thing on the centerline tank. The Skyraider had a very characteristic dirty centerline tank because all that stuff would drip down onto the tank. So I did the same exact process there, except wiping it off vertically, as I mentioned with respect to the fuselage. And so once I was happy with all of the oil stains and the streaking in that, I then went through with an airbrush and very, very thinned down black paint and highlighted over all of the panel lines. The key here is to go extremely light with it, and just with a nice broad stroke is the way I like to do it. And so highlighted all of the panel lines with the black. Once that was all down, I took a Scotch-Brite pad, burnished that all down, because what that does is it blends it all. Because I guarantee you, if you leave it as it is and you clear coat it, it's just not going to look right. And so I used the Scotch-Brite pad. It blends it all beautifully and gives that nice faded look versus a much more harsh kind of line that you could potentially get if you didn't do that. Once I was happy there, I applied the exhaust stains, and again, I just used the black for that as well. And so, you know, just airbrushed it, applied layers and layers to get it as dark as I wanted to. And so then once I had the black down, I came back with some flat gold gray to the centers of that, kind of faded the centers right at the exhaust to simulate heat there. And so then after that, that was it. I went through, clear coated the airplane again to protect all of that hard work. And that finished off the panel lines and the weathering. Now the key in all of this is subtlety as well as discretion, right? You don't want to go too crazy with it. Of course, these options were extremely dirty, and I actually may go through and add some additional weathering on the underside because I feel like it's even now it's still too light. So then once I had all of the panel lines, weathering all done, I added a few finishing touches. Now I had mentioned some 3D printed bombs. I went through and designed a Mark 82 with the low drag fins that interfaced with the outboard pylons, because those are set up for the rockets that come with the kit. And so there's 2 slots in each pylon. And so what I ended up doing is I designed an integrated bomb rack and sway brace kind of assembly that printed along with the bombs themselves. And those interfaced with those slots in the pylons. And then from there, I put magnets down. There's 3 magnets holding each bomb. There's no rotation. They have a really nice hard holding force to them. And so those should be fantastic in the air. I can't wait to fly it and see what it looks like. But to prepare those parts, I printed them in PETG, just lightly sanded them with 180 grit sandpaper, primered them once, sanded them with 180 grit sandpaper again, primered it again, and then wet sanded that second primer coat and then painted them. I used Tamiya for the olive drab, and then I used Rust-Oleum, the yellow that they have, to paint the noses. And then I painted the fuses silver, of course, and then hand painted those integrated bomb racks. That was it for the bombs. I had to build 10 bombs, and I also printed a rocket pod on each pylon that I found online. Put those on those inboard outer sections, and that finished it off. I also designed and printed a M117 750-pound bomb, and those are actually releasable. They're on the center section outboard pylons, and so those were printed out of TPU, which is a flexible material. They all hold together with magnets, so what I can do is drop in some flour, some dirt or something like that. When they drop, they'll split apart. You'll see, you know, whatever's inside there kind of fly out of the bombs, but makes them super easy. They just drop back together with the magnets, put them back on the bomb racks, and so I can drop them again. I plan to have a whole lot of fun with that. The centerline tank is releasable as well, but I don't expect to actually drop that one in flight. And so to finish it all off, I ended up 3D printing some of the antennas on the backbone, prepped them in the same way that I prepped the bombs, and that was it. I glued them in place, and so that was the process. And like I said, I love the airplane, how it came out, man. It totally transformed the whole airframe. It looked great in the stock colors, but it's hard to beat, you know, FS accurate colors on a scale model. It totally just changes the looks of it. Doesn't matter the size of the airplane, the techniques that I show you are transferable to all of them. A big thank you to George Merritt. He flew this airplane and he sent me that book with a personalized inscription, and I can't thank him enough for that. It's so cool. It's amazing, you know, the people that you get to meet and you run across through this hobby. It's a direct link to full-scale aviation. It's so cool. So that's it for this video, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to follow along on social media at the RC Geek. Subscribe. Be on the lookout for my flight review for this airplane. And so yeah, until next time, I'll see you at the field.